Trust God and watch Him move. Morning prayer for strength, peace, and gratitude. There are moments when life feels motionless, when every prayer echoes back in silence, when every door stays closed, and it seems like heaven itself has gone quiet. You look around and nothing seems to change. You're doing your best, you're believing, but the ground beneath your feet feels still. Yet what if the silence you fear is the very space where God is working the most? This is where faith begins. Not when everything aligns, but when nothing makes sense and you choose to trust anyway. Trust is not passive waiting. It's active surrender. It's the decision to believe that God is not only listening, but orchestrating something far greater than what your eyes can see. Every delay has a design. Every detour hides direction. Every quiet season holds divine movement beneath its surface. David knew this truth deeply. Before he became king, he spent years running from danger, waiting for promises that felt postponed. And yet, during that waiting, God was not idle. He was shaping David's courage, refining his character, and preparing his heart for the throne. The same God who worked in the hidden years of David's life is working in the unseen chapters of yours. When you can't see God's hand, it's not because He's absent. It's because He's holding everything together. He's the quiet architect behind your story, aligning pieces you didn't even know needed alignment. Sometimes, His greatest miracles are disguised as stillness. You may not see motion, but He's shifting what's beneath the surface, rearranging hearts, redirecting paths, and removing what could have hindered your growth. We often mistake divine timing for divine distance, but God doesn't measure progress the way the world does. In the unseen, He builds the roots that sustain you in the visible. The seed doesn't sprout overnight, yet every day it's growing beneath the soil. That's how faith matures, not in the sunlight of certainty, but in the quiet depths of trust. So if this morning you woke up wondering when God will move, hear this truth. He already is. The pause you're in is not punishment, it's preparation. The silence is not neglect, it's strategy. And the waiting is not wasted, it's the womb of your next miracle. Every great move of God begins with a moment that feels like nothing. Abraham waited. Joseph waited. Hannah waited. But each of them discovered that while they waited, heaven worked. God's timing is not slow, it's perfect. And if you will trust Him in the stillness, you will one day look back and see that He was moving all along, not around you, but within you. Trust is not pretending everything is fine. It's knowing that even in the silence, everything is under control. This is where the breakthrough begins, not when things change, but when your faith deepens. So as this prayer unfolds, let it awaken your spirit to the truth that God has never stopped moving. He's not done with you. He's not distant. He's deliberate. And in ways you cannot yet see, His hand is already at work. Trust is built in the unknown. Real trust is not born in the moments when everything makes sense. It's forged in the tension of uncertainty, in the spaces where answers haven't yet arrived. When God asks you to move without knowing the destination, to believe without visible proof, or to wait without explanation, that's not abandonment. That's invitation. It's in those moments that faith stops being theory and becomes life. Abraham's story begins here. In the book of Genesis, chapter 12, God tells him, "Leave your country, your people, and your father's house, and go to the land I will show you." No map, no timeline, no visible sign of security, only a promise and a voice. Trust was not the result of clarity, it was the bridge built in the dark. And that's exactly how God works with us. He doesn't always show the entire road because He's more interested in forming trust than providing directions. The unknown is not your enemy. It's your classroom. It's the sacred space where you learn to walk by faith and not by sight. When you can no longer predict what's next, you begin to depend on the one who already knows. Every uncertain step becomes an act of worship. Every unanswered question becomes an altar of trust. But trusting in the unknown doesn't mean pretending you're not afraid. Even faith has trembling hands. The difference is that instead of letting fear dictate the next move, you choose to take another step forward, believing that the same God who called you out will carry you through. The path of faith is rarely straight. It winds, it narrows, it disappears into shadows. Yet every curve holds the fingerprints of a God who leads perfectly. When the disciples followed Jesus, they too walked into uncertainty. He never handed them an itinerary. He simply said, "Follow me." And that's still his call today. Not understand me, but follow me. Faith doesn't always see, but it always moves, and the movement itself becomes the miracle, because it proves you believe the promise more than the circumstance. There will be seasons when you'll want evidence, when your heart will crave confirmation before obedience. But trust often comes before proof. You won't always feel ready. You'll rarely have all the facts. Yet that's the soil where divine trust grows, in obedience without outcome, in surrender without full understanding. God hides direction in dependency. The less you know, the more you listen. The more uncertain the road, the more present his voice becomes. Sometimes what you call confusion is actually the quiet training of your faith. You're learning to lean, not on logic, but on presence. You're discovering that the unknown isn't meant to frighten you, it's meant to form you. So when life feels unclear, don't rush to escape it. Pause, breathe, and ask, what if this uncertainty is not a setback, but a sacred setup? What if this is where trust is being born, in the tension, in the questions, in the silence? Faith doesn't demand visibility, it demands surrender. You don't need to know where the path ends. You only need to know who walks beside you. And when you realize that, the unknown no longer feels threatening. It becomes holy ground. When God delays, he's designing something deeper. Every delay has a story. When God doesn't move according to your schedule, it's not because he's forgotten you. It's because he's forming something you can't yet comprehend. Divine timing isn't about withholding, it's about weaving. While you're waiting for the visible breakthrough, God is working on invisible foundations, aligning details, healing wounds, and preparing hearts so that when the promise arrives, it doesn't crush you, it completes you. We often mistake delay for denial because we've been trained to equate speed with blessing. But in the kingdom of God, slowness often signals depth. What takes longer tends to last longer. The roots God grows in the waiting are the very things that keep your faith alive when the winds of life rise. If everything came immediately, you'd have no reason to lean on him. It's the waiting that purifies your motives, deepens your dependence, and strengthens your spiritual muscles. Consider the story of Lazarus in the book of John, chapter 11. When Mary and Martha sent word that their brother was sick, Jesus didn't rush to heal him. He stayed 2 more days where he was. To human logic, that made no sense. To faith, it was preparation. When Jesus finally arrived, Lazarus had already died. And that's exactly where the miracle began. God didn't delay to destroy their hope. He delayed to redefine it. What they wanted was healing, but what he gave was resurrection. That's what divine delay does. It transforms the kind of miracle you expect. You pray for relief, and God gives renewal. You ask for the door to open, and he builds an entirely new one. You think you've been waiting for something small, but all along, he's been crafting something eternal. The waiting season is often the womb of the miraculous, but waiting is rarely comfortable. It tests your patience, challenges your faith, and exposes your control. You start to ask questions like, why not now? And, has God forgotten me? Yet the truth is, God is never late. He's always right on purpose. While you focus on timing, he focuses on transformation. His delays are not detours, they're designs. He's not ignoring your prayers, he's improving your outcome. Every day you wait, something is being refined. Your character matures, your perspective shifts. You begin to see that waiting is not wasted time, it's invested time. God uses it to detach you from outcomes and attach you to him, because when you finally receive the answer, you'll know it wasn't your persistence that made it happen, it was his plan. Think of Joseph, betrayed by his brothers and forgotten in prison. 13 years passed between his dream and its fulfillment. Yet every moment was necessary. The delay wasn't punishment, it was placement. God was positioning him to stand before Pharaoh at the exact time Egypt needed him. Had the answer come earlier, the miracle would have been smaller. So when your timeline feels like it's stretching too far, remember, you're not being delayed, you're being developed. The things God builds in patience can't be rushed without breaking. His timing protects the weight of what's coming. The silence that frustrates you is often the sound of heaven rearranging your life. Every delay has direction, and every pause carries purpose. And one day, when you look back, you'll see that what felt like waiting was actually the proof that God was working, not just on your situation, but within your soul. Peace that doesn't depend on progress. Most people believe peace will come when things finally start improving, when the bills are paid, when the diagnosis changes, when relationships are restored. But that's not the peace God promises. The peace He gives isn't tied to progress. It's anchored in presence. It's not what happens when everything works out. It's what holds you together when nothing does. Jesus spoke of this kind of peace in the book of John, chapter 14, verse 27. "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives." The world's peace is fragile. It depends on circumstances, validation, and control. God's peace is supernatural. It remains unshaken in the storm because it's built on the certainty of who He is, not the uncertainty of what's happening. There's a difference between peace that visits and peace that abides. Temporary peace comes when the situation changes. Lasting peace comes when your heart changes. God doesn't wait for everything to calm down before giving you peace. He brings peace right into the chaos. The storm may rage, but the soul stays still. Think of Jesus sleeping in the boat during the storm in the book of Mark, chapter 4. The disciples panicked as waves crashed over them, crying out, "Teacher, don't you care that we're drowning?" Jesus woke up, rebuked the wind, and said, "Peace, be still." But notice, before He calmed the storm around them, He first revealed the storm within them. They didn't lack safety, they lacked faith. The true miracle wasn't the sea growing quiet. It was the realization that peace was already in the boat. That's the secret of divine peace. It's not found in changed conditions, but in constant communion. When you learn to rest in God's sovereignty, your surroundings lose their power to control you. You stop chasing calm and start carrying it. You realize that peace isn't something you enter, it's someone you trust. This kind of peace is not passive, it's powerful. It guards your mind against anxious thoughts, filters your emotions, and becomes a shield against despair. The Apostle Paul wrote in Philippians chapter 4, verse 7, that the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Notice that word, guard. This peace is not fragile, it's defensive. It stands like a sentinel around your heart, refusing to let fear take command. Sometimes God will allow a storm to continue just to prove that His peace is greater than the storm itself. If peace only existed in still waters, it would mean the waves have more power than God. But when peace holds you steady in motion, when it steadies your breath amid uncertainty, that's when it becomes unbreakable. You may not see progress yet. You may still be waiting for resolution. But peace isn't delayed until change arrives. It's available now. Every time you choose to release control, every time you silence your worry with prayer, every time you breathe and whisper, "I trust you," you build a sanctuary inside your soul where peace can dwell permanently. You don't have to wait for everything to settle before you rest. Peace doesn't come after progress. It's what produces it. When you stop fighting for control, you make room for clarity. When you let go of anxiety, solutions begin to unfold. The miracle happens when your heart calms before the circumstance does. So today, stop measuring your peace by how much you've achieved or how far you've come. Measure it by how deeply you're resting in Him. The shepherd's presence is your anchor. His promises are your stability. His peace is your portion. Not when things change, but while they're still uncertain. And when you carry that peace, progress becomes inevitable. because where peace leads, victory follows. Surrender is not giving up, it's giving over. To surrender is one of the hardest commands in Scripture, not because we don't believe in God's power, but because we fear losing control. Our human instinct tells us that letting go means weakness, that to release our grip is to give up. But in the kingdom of God, surrender isn't defeat. It's deliverance. It's the act of handing over what you were never meant to carry and trusting that God can handle what your strength cannot. When Moses stood before the Red Sea in the book of Exodus chapter 14, the people were trapped. Pharaoh's army behind them, the sea before them. Fear filled the air, and their hearts screamed for escape. But God didn't tell Moses to fight or flee. He said, "Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord." That command defied logic. Stand still, in the face of danger. Yet it was in that stillness, that surrender, that the sea began to part. The miracle came not through striving, but through letting go. Surrender doesn't mean inactivity, it means alignment. It's not doing nothing, it's doing the right thing, releasing your timeline, your plan, your outcomes into hands that see beyond your sight. When you give over control, you make room for divine intervention. You stop manipulating outcomes and start partnering with grace. You stop asking, "How will this work?" and start declaring, "God will make a way." Every person God used powerfully learned to surrender first. Abraham had to let go of Isaac. Joseph had to let go of his need for vindication. Mary had to let go of her reputation. Jesus, in the Garden of Gethsemane, surrendered everything with one sentence: "Not my will, but yours be done." And that moment of surrender changed eternity. It's easy to say you trust God when life feels manageable, but real surrender begins where your control ends. It's in those moments of helplessness, when your efforts no longer work and your understanding fails, that God invites you to stop striving and start surrendering. Because what you give up in control, you gain in peace. There's a kind of exhaustion that comes from trying to be your own savior. You pray, but you also panic. You believe, but you still carry the weight. You say God's will, but deep down you're afraid He won't come through. Yet surrender means laying down the illusion that you must hold everything together. You were never meant to be the hero of your story. You were meant to be the witness to His faithfulness. When you surrender, the pressure shifts. The outcome no longer depends on your performance, but on His promise. That's where true freedom begins. It's not the freedom to control, but the freedom from control. It's the peace that whispers, "Even if I don't know what's next, I know who's leading me." Sometimes surrender is as simple as breathing, exhaling what you can't fix and inhaling the assurance that God can. It's choosing rest over worry, worship over reasoning, trust over fear. It's saying, "God, I give you this, not because I'm done fighting, but because I believe you fight better than I ever could." And when you finally release it, something shifts. You stop drowning in what-ifs and start floating on what is, the truth that God is faithful, capable, and never late. The moment you give it over is the moment heaven begins to move, because surrender is not the end of your strength, it's the beginning of His. The stillness that precedes the miracle. Before every great move of God, there is a moment of stillness, a sacred pause that feels like nothing is happening. Yet that silence is often the birthplace of transformation. God's greatest work rarely begins with noise. It begins with quiet hearts that learn to listen. Stillness is not stagnation. It's the preparation for movement. When the prophet Elijah fled into the wilderness, broken and exhausted, he expected to encounter God in dramatic ways. In the book of 1 Kings, chapter 19, there came a mighty wind, an earthquake, and a fire. But God was not in any of them. Then came a gentle whisper, and there He was. The presence Elijah longed for wasn't in the spectacle, it was in the silence. That moment changed everything. The whisper carried more power than the storm, because it spoke directly to his soul. We live in a world that fears silence. We fill every gap with sound, every pause with distraction, because stillness exposes our vulnerability. It forces us to face the noise within, the doubts, the fears, the endless questions. But the truth is, God speaks most clearly in the quiet your soul resists. He often waits for the world around you to quiet down before he releases revelation. Stillness is not about inactivity. It's about intimacy. It's the place where striving stops and sensitivity begins. When you stop running, you start hearing. When you stop trying to fix everything, you start seeing what he's already fixing. Many miss God's voice not because he's silent, but because they're surrounded by too much noise. The miracle doesn't require more effort. It requires more awareness. Think of the moment before Jesus multiplied the loaves and fish. The crowd was restless and hungry, the disciples anxious. But Jesus looked up to heaven, gave thanks, and paused. In that brief stillness, heaven aligned with earth. Gratitude opened the door to the miraculous. Before the bread multiplied, his spirit stilled. Every miracle begins with that posture. Calm trust in the middle of chaos. When your soul learns to be still, you begin to sense movement in what once felt motionless. You realize that God is not waiting for you to push harder, but to pause deeper. The quiet between the promise and the breakthrough is not emptiness. It's divine orchestration. God uses stillness to shift your attention from what you're waiting for to who you're waiting on. The valley between your prayer and his answer may seem silent, but heaven is never idle. The stillness you're in right now may feel like delay, but it's really design. God is preparing your miracle in silence so that when it manifests, you'll recognize it as his work, not your effort. The seed always grows underground before it breaks through the soil, unseen, uncelebrated, but alive. So when life feels quiet, resist the urge to panic. Don't confuse silence with absence. Don't rush what's sacred. Sometimes God pauses the noise of life to fine-tune the melody of your heart. And if you can sit long enough in the quiet, you'll begin to hear the rhythm of his grace, steady, patient, unstoppable. Stillness is not the end of movement, it's the start of divine momentum. It's the moment before the miracle, when heaven holds its breath and prepares to release what your faith has made room for. Learn to rest there. Trust that the silence you're standing in is the sound of something holy being built, not around you, but within you. When gratitude becomes your weapon. Gratitude is not just a feeling, it's a force. It's the posture that shifts your perspective from what's missing to what's moving, from what's broken to what's being built. When you begin to thank God in the middle of uncertainty, gratitude becomes more than politeness. It becomes warfare. It silences fear, disarms anxiety, and unlocks divine strength. In the book of Acts, chapter 16, Paul and Silas were beaten, chained, and thrown into a dark prison. By every human measure, they had no reason to rejoice. Yet at midnight, they began to pray and sing hymns to God. They didn't wait for freedom to worship. They worshiped until freedom came. The moment their voices rose in praise, the prison walls shook, their chains broke, and the doors flew open. That's the power of gratitude in the midst of struggle. It turns your pain into a platform for God's power. Thankfulness is not denial, it's defiance. It doesn't ignore the storm, it declares that the storm doesn't win. Gratitude is how you reclaim your peace when fear tries to steal it. It's how you remind your soul that even in darkness, God is still good. Every thank you in the valley becomes a declaration that you refuse to let your circumstances determine your confidence. But gratitude is not natural. It's spiritual. The human heart gravitates toward complaint because it's easier to see what's wrong than to trust what's right. That's why gratitude requires faith, because it's choosing to focus on what God is doing, even when it's not visible yet. When you start thanking Him for what hasn't arrived, you prove that your trust is stronger than your timeline. Jesus modeled this perfectly. Before feeding the 5,000, He took 5 loaves and 2 fish, clearly not enough, and gave thanks. Before the miracle, He thanked. Before the multiplication, He praised. Gratitude didn't follow the miracle, it caused it. That's the divine pattern. Thanksgiving opens the door to transformation. The moment you choose gratitude over grumbling, heaven moves. Gratitude doesn't need a reason, It just needs remembrance. You don't have to feel thankful to be thankful. You simply have to look back and recall the faithfulness of God, how He carried you when you didn't think you could stand, how He provided when the resources ran out, how He comforted you when no one else could. Gratitude is memory turned into worship. When your heart is grateful, fear loses its vocabulary. Worry can't thrive in the same space as worship. Every time you thank God in adversity, you declare that His goodness is greater than your pain, and that declaration shifts the atmosphere, not just around you, but within you. If you're struggling today, start there. Find one reason to give thanks. Not because everything is perfect, but because you know the one who is. Gratitude changes how you see your situation, and often, that change in perspective is the miracle itself. It teaches you to focus less on what you're fighting and more on who is fighting for you. Gratitude is your greatest weapon because it reminds you of victory that's already been secured. The cross was the ultimate act of God turning pain into power. When you thank Him through your tears, you are aligning yourself with that same resurrection power, proclaiming that even in the midnight hour, light is coming. So lift your heart, lift your voice, and give thanks, not as a reaction, but as resistance. Because gratitude doesn't just express faith, it activates it. And when you live in that posture, nothing can chain your peace again. Seeing beyond what you feel. Faith is not the absence of feeling, it's the decision to see beyond it. Your emotions are real, but they were never meant to rule your direction. Feelings change with the weather, but truth stands unmoved. Trusting God means refusing to let temporary emotions define eternal realities. It means choosing to believe in what He said, even when everything around you contradicts it. Joseph understood this truth more than most. Betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused and forgotten in prison, his story was filled with pain that could have easily become bitterness. But instead of letting his feelings dictate his faith, he learned to see through them. Years later, when he stood face to face with the same brothers who had destroyed his life, he said, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." In that single sentence, Joseph redefined everything he had endured. His pain became purpose. His suffering became strategy. He saw what others couldn't, that God's hand had been working through every heartbreak. When you walk with God, not every feeling will make sense. There will be mornings when hope feels distant, when prayer feels dry, when trust feels hard. Yet faith doesn't need feelings to function. Faith lives by conviction, not condition. It looks at the storm and says, "This is not the end." It looks at the silence and says, "God is still speaking." And it looks at disappointment and says, "Something better is being built." The danger of living by emotion is that it traps you in the present. Feelings only know how to measure what is happening now. Faith, on the other hand, measures what's coming. When you live by what you feel, fear grows louder and trust grows weaker. But when you live by faith, you begin to see with heaven's perspective, and what once terrified you starts to make sense. This doesn't mean ignoring your emotions. God never asked you to be numb. He asked you to be anchored. The Psalms are full of honest emotion, fear, grief, anger, confusion. Yet every lament eventually bends toward trust. David didn't hide his feelings. He brought them to God. That's the difference between being ruled by emotion and being refined by it. When you bring your pain into His presence, He transforms it into perspective. There's a powerful moment in the Gospels when Jesus visits the tomb of Lazarus. He knows a miracle is coming, yet He still weeps. Why? Because divine perspective doesn't cancel human emotion. It redeems it. You can cry and still believe. You can grieve and still trust. You can feel everything and still walk by faith. Emotions are indicators, not dictators. They point out where you are, but they don't determine where you're going. When your feelings say, "God is silent," faith whispers, "He's still near." When your heart says, "It's over," faith replies, "It's only beginning." When your mind says, "I can't," faith reminds you, He can. Faith doesn't wait for feelings to align. It steps forward until they do. Seeing beyond what you feel is a discipline of the heart. It's training yourself to interpret life through truth, not through turbulence. It's learning to look at pain and still say, God is good. It's standing in uncertainty and still declaring, God is in control. It's waking up in weakness and still praying, Lord, I trust you. When you begin to live this way, emotions no longer determine your peace. His presence does. The storm may still roar, but your soul will stay steady. Because you've learned that faith isn't about denying what you feel, it's about defining what you see. And when you see through the eyes of faith, even your tears begin to shine with purpose. How God uses interruptions as invitations. Every interruption in life feels like an inconvenience at first. The plans you made suddenly collapse. The doors you counted on close without warning, and you're left standing in the tension between disappointment and confusion. But what if interruptions are not obstacles? What if they're invitations? Divine moments rarely arrive on schedule. They come disguised as disruptions, pulling you away from what's familiar so God can lead you toward what's eternal. The woman at the well in the book of John, chapter 4, didn't plan to meet Jesus that day. She went to draw water in the heat of the afternoon, at a time when she could avoid the judgment of others. Yet, that interruption became her transformation. One unexpected conversation changed her identity, her purpose, and her future. What she saw as an ordinary task became the moment heaven met her in her daily routine. That's what God does. He steps into the unplanned and turns it into the unforgettable. Sometimes the very things that disrupt your rhythm are the doors that lead you to destiny. The job you lost, the relationship that ended, the plan that failed. None of these caught God by surprise. He allows interruptions not to punish you, but to position you. When He interrupts, He's not ruining your plan. He's revealing His. The detour is the disguise of divine direction. Moses wasn't looking for a burning bush. He was tending sheep. David wasn't chasing a crown. He was delivering bread. Mary wasn't searching for an angel. She was living an ordinary day in Nazareth. Every great move of God began as an interruption. He takes the normal and turns it into the supernatural. The moment you stop resisting interruptions and start recognizing them as invitations, your entire perspective shifts. But our instinct is to control. We fight to get back to what feels predictable, to return to the plan we built. Yet control blinds us to revelation. When life doesn't go as planned, we panic. But God smiles, because His plans were never fragile. The path you didn't choose may be the one that brings you closer to His presence. God's interruptions often feel inconvenient because they challenge comfort. They expose attachments you didn't realize you had. You begin to see that your faith wasn't in God's will. It was in your own certainty. But interruptions dismantle illusions of control and invite you to step into deeper trust. They remind you that God doesn't need your permission to redirect your purpose. When Jesus passed by the disciples' boat in the storm, Peter could have stayed where he was, clinging to safety. But the interruption, that sudden appearance on the water, was an invitation to step into the miraculous. When Peter said, "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come," the interruption became a doorway. The same water that terrified him became the ground beneath his feet. The divine pattern is clear. Interruption leads to encounter, and encounter leads to transformation. Every delay, every closed door, every unexpected turn is God's way of saying, "Look up, I'm here. I'm doing something new." You may not see it yet, but the interruption you're resisting could be the very thing that unlocks your next chapter. So when life shifts suddenly, don't ask, "Why is this happening?" Ask, "Lord, what are you inviting me into?" That single question turns chaos into clarity, because every interruption from heaven carries an invitation to trust deeper, to see wider, and to move closer to the heart of God. What feels like a disruption is often divine direction in disguise. And when you embrace it, you'll realize that the life you planned can't compare to the life He's preparing. The shift that happens when you let God lead. There comes a moment in every believer's journey when the battle between control and trust reaches its breaking point. You've prayed, planned, and pushed, but things still haven't gone the way you hoped. It's here, in this space of surrender, that a quiet shift begins to happen. When you stop forcing outcomes and start following divine direction, everything changes. Because when God leads, peace follows. Letting God lead doesn't mean life becomes easier. It means your heart becomes steadier. The same waves still crash, but you no longer fear them because you've learned who commands them. The shift is subtle yet powerful. You stop striving to make things happen and start moving at the rhythm of grace. You begin to understand that delay is not denial, and detours are not disasters. They are the shepherd's guidance in disguise. Psalm 37 says, "Commit your way to the Lord, trust in Him, and He will act." That word commit means to roll it over, to transfer the full weight from your shoulders to His. You are not meant to carry the responsibility of outcomes. You are meant to walk in obedience. God leads best when you stop resisting and start releasing. The burden you're holding isn't a test of endurance, it's a call to trust. When you let God lead, clarity begins to replace chaos. Decisions no longer come from panic, but from peace. You stop rushing ahead of Him because you realize His pace is protection. Sometimes His no is saving you from heartbreak. Sometimes His wait is aligning something far greater than what you asked for. Leadership in the hands of God is never random. It's redemptive. Every closed door, every turned path, every unexpected change is a deliberate act of love. We often say, God is in control, yet live as if we are. True trust is proven when we stop trying to fix what only faith can hold. When Israel reached the edge of the Jordan River, they faced an impossible crossing. But God told the priest to step into the water first, while it was still overflowing. Only after they stepped did the waters part. The miracle was waiting on movement, but not just any movement, obedient movement. Letting God lead means stepping even when you don't see where your foot will land. This shift changes everything about how you live. You stop asking God to bless your plans and start asking how you can join His. You stop measuring success by outcomes and start measuring it by obedience. You begin to find joy not in control but in companionship, knowing that the one leading you is not a distant ruler but a loving shepherd who walks beside you. There's a deep freedom that comes from this kind of trust. You don't have to have all the answers to move forward. You don't have to understand everything to obey. You just have to be willing to follow. And the more you let Him lead, the lighter your steps become. The anxiety that once consumed you begins to fade, replaced by assurance that the one guiding you knows the end from the beginning. When God leads, nothing is wasted. Even the seasons that felt confusing will one day make sense in His story. The people who left, the prayers that seemed unanswered, the opportunities that disappeared, all of them fit perfectly into His plan. You will see that His leadership was never about control. It was about communion. He didn't just want to direct your path, He wanted to walk it with you. So take a breath, unclench your hands, and let go. The same God who led Abraham into promise, who guided Ruth through loss, who steered Paul through storms, is leading you now. You don't have to know where this road ends. You only need to know who's holding it. And when you truly let Him lead, peace stops being something you chase. It becomes something you carry. Watch God move in the space your faith created. Every prayer, every tear, every moment of surrender has been building toward this. The quiet yet unstoppable movement of God. You may not feel it yet, but something is shifting. Every time you chose trust over fear, peace over panic, worship over worry, you created space for heaven to move. Faith doesn't force God's hand. It invites His presence. And where His presence dwells, change becomes inevitable. This is the beauty of trust. It turns ordinary moments into sacred ground. You begin to see the evidence of His work not in dramatic displays, but in subtle signs. A door that opens just when you're ready, strength that appears right when you thought you couldn't go on, peace that returns even before the situation changes. These are not coincidences. They are confirmations that your faith has made room for His hand to move. When you look back, you'll see that God was never still. In the silence, He was speaking. In the waiting, He was working. In the pain, He was purifying. In the delay, He was designing. You thought nothing was happening, but he was building something eternal. Not just around you, but within you. Because the greatest miracle is not what happens to your circumstances, it's what happens to your heart. That's why faith matters. Faith is not a feeling, it's a posture. It's what you stand on when nothing else makes sense. It's what you cling to when the evidence says otherwise. Faith says, I don't see it yet, but I know he's moving. Faith says, even if it takes time, I trust his timing. Faith says, I don't need to understand, I just need to stay close. You may not know what the next step looks like, but you can trust the one who does. Every act of surrender, every prayer of gratitude, every quiet choice to believe is a seed that God waters in his time. And when it blooms, it won't just bless you, it will bless everyone around you. So, as this prayer draws to a close, take a moment to breathe. Let go of the weight of what you can't control and rest in the certainty that God is already in motion. The same God who parted seas, calmed storms, and raised the dead is still moving today, in your life, in your home, in your heart. Watch him move in the spaces you've surrendered. Watch him transform what felt like loss into purpose. Watch him turn your stillness into strength, your silence into song, your waiting into worship. Because faith may start small, but once released, it has the power to move mountains. If this prayer touched your spirit, let it keep moving. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that God still works in the unseen. Like this video if it stirred your heart, and subscribe so you can continue walking this journey of faith, peace, and purpose with us every morning. Keep trusting, keep thanking, keep believing, because in the quiet spaces your faith creates, God is already moving, and his movement never fails.